All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. The topic for tonight, as mentioned, is building comfort with uncomfortable conversations. So we're going to be talking about different strategies and building that level of comfort in different ways, especially when we're talking with both young people, especially, but with really anybody, we can adapt these tools and tactics for kind of jumping right in on some conversations that might be uncomfortable around topics that we can build more comfort around, things of that nature. So to give you a little bit of, why can I not advance my screen? Hold on one second here. Sorry for the technical glitch here, everybody. We'll get there, I promise. Sorry about this, everybody. All right. Try to share that screen one more time and see if we can make it all work for everybody. All right, let's see. There we go. All right, so as you can see, that's me. You get to see me twice. The only reason I have this here is to let you know that I am the director of Wayland Youth and Family Services, and to give you a quick overview of what Youth and Family Services is providing in town. Youth and Family Services provides clinical support for youth 18 and under and their direct family members. We focus on providing that free of charge and really working directly with family units to hopefully provide tips, tools, tactics, and different ways to navigate different challenging moments in their life of a magnitude of variety. We have two clinicians primarily that are working with our young people and their family members, being Kelsey San Clemente, our assistant director and clinical supervisor, and Paige Gandolfi, who is our clinician, in conjunction with myself here in town. So that's a little bit of background on that. In addition to that, we do a tremendous amount of community education and outreach, youth development work, healthy relationship work, violence prevention, and substance use information as well. So that if you ever need any services, feel free to reach out to us. You can find all of our information on the town website in the Youth and Family Service tab. But just to jump now into the conversation tonight. The first concept I want to talk about is the fact that change only happens through action. And what I mean by that I say this is that nothing changes if you don't address it and you don't figure out different ways to figure out both what is in need of change, what we're evaluating and how we want to change it, and making sure that we're all on the same page so that we're all moving forward towards a common goal. We're going to talk a lot about that. The challenge with this is, especially with challenging conversations, and when we're looking at things that bring us anxiety, things that bring us that feeling of unease, or that we just really don't want to talk about, we tend to push them away. It's one of those things where avoidance feels great sometimes. We just take it and we're like, I'm going to deal with that later. I'm going to push it over here. I'm not going to think about that thing. Maybe if I ignore it, it'll just go away. As we all know, if we ignore things, generally speaking, not only do they not go away, typically speaking, they get worse, and or everybody's disappointed in some capacity because everybody has different feelings that they're not voicing and then they're not getting to at that moment. So really, when we have these challenging topics that we're looking to build a rapport and talking about, and we're looking to find different ways to bring that comfort around it, we need to look at how we're looking to change, what we're looking to change, and the willingness to change. So we're going to jump in and talk a whole lot about that. So the first thing I want to talk about is building comfort. And what we're going to do is we're going to discover what we're trying to build comfort about. We're looking at finding ways to talk about the subjects that you want to discuss. So first of all, the first thing we need to figure out is, what do we want to talk about? What are those challenging concepts we're looking to address? Are we looking to talk about relationships in our families? Are we looking to talk about stigmas and figuring out how we can reduce stigma? Are you looking to talk about setting boundaries, whether it be around screen time for young children, or potential substance use for older children, or healthy relationships, or general behaviors, or any number of things. And if anybody has something that they're really struggling to talk about or finding that comfort in, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'm happy to talk about that and use it as an example. But we need to find ways to get that comfort and start to discuss it. And one of the ways I love to do this, especially when I'm working with young people, whether it's my own personal children or young people that I work with in the community, is to do things that come naturally to some of us. It's not going to come naturally to everybody, I know, but tell stories, share experiences, discuss views. When things are coming up in your day-to-day life, whether it's something you see on the news, whether you said something that you're concerned about, start to normalize that conversation. Start to just work it in a dialogue, find reasons to talk about it. The more we normalize and the more we talk about these things, the more we open up the opportunity and the possibilities for people to have that comfort to talk about, especially with their younger folks. At that point in time, they're going to know that it's not off the table to talk about those conversations. It's not off the table to ask questions, to propose ideas, thoughts, and even if it's hypotheticals where they're not talking directly about themselves, that ever-present conversation of, I have a friend that, allow that to happen. Allow that story to be told. Listen to it from the perspective of they have a friend. Figure it out, look at what they're willing to share. Which brings us to our next point on the slide, which is listening to young people in your life. It's a huge, huge, huge proponent. Anytime we're talking to anybody, give them your attention. Make sure that you're listening. Make sure that you are an active participant in that conversation, especially if our young person is being vulnerable, if they're asking for help, if they're looking to start a conversation, if you've started the conversation and now they're willing to share. Make sure that you're listening. We are all really attached to technology. We're using it right now. I'm really happy we're using it. I'm happy that we have this opportunity to connect with one another. And it's one of those things where this brings us opportunities we didn't have before. We all typically have one of these where we walk around and we have a phone that we're either checking messages, looking at emails, looking at text messages, getting alerts from different apps. When you're having conversations with people, especially difficult conversations, be 100% present. Give them the honor and the respect to ignore that technology if you can. I know it's not always possible because sometimes it's during work hours. Sometimes there's emergencies, things like that. But if possible, put the screen away, be engaged. When you give people that presence and you give them that energy, they're more welcome and they're more comfortable to typically open up and start sharing things with you. So make sure you're listening. As far as normalizing conversations at any age, if you have the privilege of having really young people in your life, start those conversations early. One of the biggest things that I'm a fan of, especially that I'm thrilled that I did this with my kids, and I'm not saying I did it perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, is there was no conversation that was off limits. And it was one of those things where we talked about everything. And sometimes it got really awkward, but you roll through that. The more and more you have the opportunity to have those awkward conversations and then to reframe them and to put those boundaries around them, where as an adult, you can say, absolutely, we can talk about this. Let's do it in an age-appropriate way. Let's put some framework around this. Let's figure out what we're actually talking about. But it gives them that opportunity to feel that comfort and to build that bond with you. They can trust you. They know they're going to come to you at that point in time. And hopefully, and what we're all shooting for here, and we all know everybody eventually keeps secrets. There's things that they're super uncomfortable about that they don't want to share with you. But my hope, and something that I try to always reinforce with my own children and then the young people I work with, is that I'd much rather have you come to me and have a really awkward, really weird conversation and something that might make us all uncomfortable. I'd rather have that conversation and be able to assist you or be able to talk to you about what my expectations and boundaries are, resources if you're not comfortable talking to me, but since we can help you with to find other resources. Because a conversation, especially ahead of time, is a lot better than dealing with the aftermath of a questionable conversation or a questionable decision. That being said, it also builds the comfort that if something questionable does happen or something risky happens, there's still a baseline foundation where people have that comfort then to come to you and ask questions and have a conversation after, in the sense that they don't feel like they have to hide something, hopefully, because there is that transparency. The more we normalize these conversations about any topic, the more we reduce stigma, the more we reduce concern, embarrassment, and we build that comfort and confidence so that people are willing to talk to us. After we discover and we figure out what it is we're talking about, what it is we're trying to build that comfort with, find time to talk, in the sense that if we don't have time to actually have the conversations, it comes back to that change action model. If you don't have time to actually have conversations, have dialogue, listen to questions, converse, you're not going to find time to make that change. Some base level ways we can find time to talk. We all drive places, whether we're driving places, whether we're on public transportation, whether we're taking people back and forth to arts organizations, sporting practices, wherever you're going, have conversations in the car. Turn the music down for a second. Find a reason to just start telling stories, have conversation, check in about the day, things like that. Especially with our young people, it's one of the few times that we have them contained as well, where we have that opportunity where we're sitting in a car together. You also don't have to look at each other at that point in time. As the driver, you're looking straight ahead, you're looking out that window. Eye contact is a wonderful thing, but sometimes it can be too intense and people need to kind of just stare out a window and share a thought into the world and put those words out there. It's a wonderful, wonderful time. So take advantage of that if you can. Number 2 for a recommendation on this is having a thing. And what I mean by that is find something that is a regular, comfortable thing that you do together. Find that time, especially with children and young people in your life, where you have the opportunity to like have a weekly walk, like have an opportunity if you have an animal, like take the dog for a walk together. If you have a show that you like to watch or rewatch, do that. Like if there's a game that you like to play, whatever it is, but find that thing where there's a dedicated amount of time that you are going to make for each other, hopefully on a regular basis, so that you have an opportunity to discuss and also to have a little distraction where it's just casual conversation, but you're building that connection, you're building that trust, you're building that bond. If we don't make the time, people don't have the opportunity to talk. When I talk about building consistent communication, I mean just that. Consistency is key, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in a second. But have a consistent message. Let people know in your life that you're open to having conversations and that you're not shutting them down. The other one that I love to use and to set up as a fun little thing, if you have the privilege of living with somebody, be it an adult, be it children, that you're trying to have regular conversations with, I love doing regular check-ins, and the shorthand for that is with my kids personally, I use what's your number of the day? And the number of the day is between 1 and 10. And they know that 10 is the most magical, wonderful day in the whole wide world where everything is going fantastically. 1 is the polar opposite. And if I see especially that my kids are either struggling or having an awesome day or something of that nature, I'll be like, hey, what's your number? And they don't have to describe it a whole lot. They can just be like 7. I know that they're doing a little bit better than average. If it's a 4 or a 3, something's going on. Maybe we should have another check-in and maybe we should figure out a little bit more and find time to make sure that we are engaging with each other. But it gives them that out where they can just set that level and say, this is where I am. I might not have the time to discuss it right now. But in addition to that, it gives them the opportunity where if they want to discuss it and they want to further talk about it, they can be like, I'm a 3 and here's why. Like, I had this interaction at school today. I had this interaction with a friend. My work is doing X, Y, Z, and it's making me really upset. Whatever it happens to be, it gives them that little bit and they know I'm paying attention and they know I'm checking in. This isn't just for young people. If you can normalize it with anybody you live in, it's a great opportunity just to have that little litmus test every day, being like, where are you at? In addition to that, the question of the day is just silly little things like that too. It can be a really silly question about like scrambled eggs are over easy, iced tea or lemonade, like whatever it is, but it's just fun little things where we get to know each other and it's a conversation starter again. So much of having challenging conversations and growing comfortable with them is breaking the ice to get people to start talking and then building that comfort through consistency where people feel comfortable and supported to keep talking. They know that if they get vulnerable and they share their true emotions, they're talking about things that they're struggling with, especially if it's a struggle interpersonal between the two of you, or because of a boundary that was set or an expectation that was broken, it gives them the comfort and opportunity to know that it's going to be okay if they share. It's going to be okay if they talk about these things. and we have the ability to continue that conversation, and they know they're going to be supported. So with that, let's talk about consistency real quick. When I say talk, they hear you, this is really something that I focus on with young people when I'm working with them. There's scientific proof in brain science that if you actually repeat a set of boundaries or expectations to somebody at least 5 times, the likelihood that that is in their head is astronomically magnified at that point in time. So it's one of those things when our young people consistently hear a constant expectation, whether it's, I expect you to make your bed in the morning. I'll just use that as an example. I frankly don't care. It's one of those things where if that is the expectation, it's one of those things where they know if you say it and you're consistent about it, that that's the expectation. In addition to that, if they know what those boundaries and expectations are around that, where it's like, if you do this, you may get a reward. It may just be an expectation where like, we just acknowledge and say thank you for the fact that you did it. You're not going to get something special for it, but they know what it is. They also know if they don't do it, what the consequences are at that point in time. Something like as easy as making his bed, not the end of the world. When our children age up, though, we're talking about having healthy relationships. We're talking about how we treat one another. We're talking about potential risky behaviors around substance use, around risky decisions around driving, around parties, around any number of things. At that point in time, we know that consistency is super key. If we have those little voices in the back of their head, the number one thing we're looking for young people to do normally when they're making risky decisions potentially, it's not that we don't want them to make them, actually. We were all young. We all made risky decisions. We all got here somehow. Some people aren't that lucky, but that is what happens. We want people to pause. My goal in life and all the work that I do is to get people to pause and to make informed, educated decisions. I want people to seek truthful information. I want to reduce stigma, and I want people to make informed decisions around risk. With that consistency, we can help motivate especially our young people to make those informed decisions. But this also goes for adults as well. We build this whole catalog of how we operate, how we assess risk, how we communicate with people, what we're comfortable with. We all have things that we're uncomfortable with. The more and more we can address those things, the more and more you can build comfort and you can actually move forward. And with consistent outcomes and response to things, you know what to expect. As humans, we like to know what's going to happen. We like to be surprised sometimes, but we feel really comfortable when there's predictability. Consistency builds predictability where you know roughly what the outcome's going to be. For young people especially, this is super important because when you set expectations early and often and you're checking in on it, they feel that boundary set. They understand what the consequences are. They understand what the expectations are. And they know if you're being consistent with your response, what to expect. They can make that calculated decision at that point in time of, is this risk worth it? Is the consequence for my action worth it? Can I talk about this? Can I come to like my parent or my guardian at that point in time? And can I ask for a variation in what that boundary is? Because I know that they're willing to have that conversation. If I earned it, if it's worth changing, if it's worth a check-in, they're talking to you about it ahead of time versus just taking that risk and potentially hiding it and then becoming a much larger situation at that point in time. So be consistent with your expectations. Make sure that you're checking in with people. 89% of our Wayland youth, based on our Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, report that they have a trusted adult to talk to. I think that's a great number. I also think it's a really challenging number because that also means 11% of our youth feel like they don't have a trusted adult to talk to. And when we talk about a trusted adult, this could be a parental figure. This could be a teacher. It could be a coach. It could be an aunt and uncle, a friend of the family, anything like that. Excuse me. By building that consistency, though, and by having really clear boundaries, you could be that trusted adult for your child, for your friend's child, a grandchild, an aunt and uncle, or a cousin, whoever. It's one of those things where it doesn't have to necessarily be a caregiver. we have the opportunity to influence more people around us in the community. If you're somebody that is viewed to anybody around you as a trusted source and somebody that they feel comfortable talking to, that's a huge honor. And it's something that we're trying to build in a lot of people by working through these tools and figuring out ways to gain more comfort and confidence in having any conversation. The next thing I want to talk about is that we can't expect people to know things that we don't tell them. This is a huge one for me. We all have different styles of communication. It's really important to clarify. It's really important to know that you're doing the same work and that you have the same objective. As humans, we all come at things from different perspectives. The one thing that's really important when we're having difficult conversations is to understand that we all have the same goal, hopefully. And I'm not saying we do, but let's talk about that and let's figure out what our collective goal is when we're having simple conversations or difficult conversations. That lack of clarity is what leads us to so many conflicts a lot of time, and so many hurt feelings and feelings of sadness or feelings of being let down because one person thought, I'm here to do this, and the other party thought, I'm here to do this. And you're both working, and maybe you're going parallel and you're going down the road together, but there's 30 yards in between you and you both missed the target. If you have questions, get comfortable asking them, because if you ask them, you can get that clarity and you can make sure to the best of our ability that we're both going towards the same thing. I had a whole conversation with a friend that I work with about this the other day. And one of us was saying, like, we made this analogy, and so I'll try my best to throw it out to everybody. I'm like, one of us was basically running to the wall and back a whole bunch. And it was one of those things where they felt the need to just keep doing something because they felt like if I'm doing something, I'm making progress. But they were doing this thing where they're just keeping busy, so they didn't have to think about the long-term goal. And they basically just kept going 10 feet and coming back and going 10 feet and coming back and checking in and checking in and checking in. Whereas the other person was looking 2 miles down the road, and they were just walking slowly and diligently towards that target 2 miles down the road. That's a very abstract version of this, but it's also a very clear version in the sense that you had two people who knew what the goal was, but they had a very different way of getting there. And luckily, the person who was walking that 2 miles at least bumped this other person forward 10 feet with them every time they went. So it's one of those things where you can still have different approaches. There's still going to be frustration because you're not all working together in the same exact way, and that's okay. But make sure that you have that goal specified so that you know you're at least having roughly the same conversation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Awesome. As far as opening pathways to communication, the other thing I like to say is we need to get really comfortable in honesty. A lot of times we pad conversations, especially when they're uncomfortable conversations, and we do things like I just did, and you talk in analogies, because it's one of those things where it feels a lot more comfortable to throw out these different concepts instead of actually talking about what's happening in front of you and what you're actually trying to talk about. It's never too late to talk openly and honestly. It's really uncomfortable. I recommend getting really comfortable with it, though. Sometimes it can feel really blunt. Sometimes it can feel really hurtful. If you're doing it with integrity and you're doing it with intention and you're not doing it with hurtful intent, but basically you're really just trying to make sure that you are clarifying a topic to understand that we are on the same page and we're having the same conversation, you can typically move past that. It's one of those things where there's going to be moments where that doesn't feel great. It's totally fine to acknowledge that. I encourage you to make space for the fact that that is what it feels like. But once again, unless you're identifying what you're actually talking about and having that honest communication, it's really hard to make that change. So get comfortable with it. Even if you've struggled with it in the past, work on little things. Start with low risk ones, where basically you have the opportunity to just be really clear, really direct. And then once you continue to do that, you start to build that trust with people in relationships, especially from a parent-child relationship, caregiver relationship, interpersonal relationships. Be really clear. It's hard, but through practice, we can get better and better at it, and it feels more and more natural. Also, reducing topics that are off the table or non-negotiable, especially with young people in my life, be it friends' children, my own children, the young people I work with in town on a daily basis. Nothing's off the table. We all have our own boundaries. We all have our things that we're willing to talk about and not willing to talk about. The more we can put on the come talk about a table, the more comfort we're going to have at that point in time. This is a personal thing. It's one of those things where we all have to figure out what is okay for us to talk about and what we feel comfortable talking about and what we don't. Let people know about it. But once again, I'd always rather have the conversation than deal with the ramifications of somebody who was scared to talk to me about something. The more and more we can start at a young age, make it age appropriate. Like I was talking about before, tell stories, use anecdotes, do all kinds of things, but make it something where your child feels comfortable talking to you about whatever it is that they're struggling with. When we are addressing those sensitive topics head on, be supportive. The number one thing that we can do to build more comfort around potential topics that are risky. For instance, I talk a lot about relationships. I talk a lot about substance use. I talk a lot about sexuality and gender. I talk a lot about this, and that's what I do professionally. It's what I do for my job. I talk about mental health. These are topics that we've been taught for so long that you don't talk about, at least in public. And it's one of those things where the more we can reduce the stigma around those things, the more we can normalize that conversation, and then we can bring that comfort to our children. Our young people are more and more comfortable talking about this, especially for those of us who are, I'm 43. I don't consider myself old. I don't consider myself young. I just am. But it's one of those things where when I was a kid, therapy was a word that you whispered. It was one of those things where people didn't openly talk about it. I am thrilled that my kids basically are like, guess what my therapist told me yesterday? And it's one of those things where when we normalize mental health and we normalize the fact that it's really important to address mental health and that everybody can benefit from therapy, everybody can benefit from open conversations, that's growth. That's action. The more we can reinforce that and normalize these conversations, I'm thrilled for that. Remember, change takes action. Let that action occur. Also, that comes down to owning what we know and what we don't know. If we don't know something, say, I don't know. I'm willing to do the work, though, and I'm willing to go look things up. I'm willing to find resources. I'm willing to find people who do know things so that we can have an educated conversation about it. I'm willing to sit down with you and make time to figure out how I can help you, how I can bring more detailed information to this conversation. Once again, be an active listener. We already talked about this, so I'm not going to harp on it, but be present. Give people eye contact if they're looking for it. If you're in a car, give them the opportunity to stare out the window. But basically make sure that they know that you're fully present in that moment. It goes a long way. People feel that energy, and if you're not there and you're just kind of faking it, people are going to know that the comfort level and that sincerity is not there. So be an active listener. And always approach from a place of learning and solution. It's one of those things where if we do this without judgment and we're looking to say, we have that end goal, we have that same goal, we've clarified what our goal is, let's learn together, let's find a solution together, let's find something that works. For clarity, once again, define what you're talking about and make sure all parties are talking about the same thing. I'm just going to keep hammering this home, because if you're not talking about the same thing, you're not making progress. And then lastly, if you're looking for a solution, even if it's just a partial solution, decide together. If you're having a conversation with one person, if you're having a conversation with 10 people, make sure that you have that buy-in. If you gave people your attention, you gave them the ability to actively listen, you had vulnerability, you were talking all together, you worked through this together. In a parent-child dynamic or in a caretaker dynamic, obviously there's always that power struggle and dynamic of, I'm the parent, I get to make these decisions. That's fine. You do. That's partially your job as a parent to say, hey, I have these decisions that need to be made. I need to make sure you're safe. I'm responsible for you. I get a say in what happens here. That also comes back to the setting clear boundaries up front, being consistent, all of that stuff. But if you're setting those clear boundaries, you're being consistent, and you're having a regular conversation, doesn't always work this way, but in theory, you can get some buy-in because you're building respect at that point in time. They understand that they can trust you. They understand that they're going to be consistent. Hopefully they understand that they can come to you with things. And at that point in time, there is that feeling of love. There's that feeling of care, safety, and openness. The more we can create buy-in and the more we can create that opportunity of feeling ownership, the more likely people they are to either come to you to talk about things, but also agree on what you worked on. If you can get through those things, you can have a lot of really difficult conversations, but you can do it pretty smoothly. And believe it or not, it gets easier and easier the more you do it. So with that, questions, comments, and concerns.
Are you a clinical psychologist? What's your background?
So my background is not. I have a background in social work, and I also have a background in the arts. I originally went to school for fine arts, and then fell backwards into human services. So I started off working
backwards or forwards?
Well, forwards, I'll say, but mistakenly, in the sense that I was working in a pottery studio, and I was also kayak guiding at the time. And one of my friends who I was a kayak guide with happened to work for the Department of Social Services in a residential program. And he said, I've seen you interact with kids. And I was also going to school for art at the time. And he said, you're great with kids. I'd like you to come check out the kids I work with and do a shadow shift. I agreed, and I went in, and I became a temporary support counselor, where basically I would fill in when people couldn't be there. Very soon, I was carrying my own caseload of 4 people. I went back to school for social work. 5 years later, I was assistant director of that program. To be fully transparent, residential care is a lot. I really appreciated it and I loved it. But after 5 years, I needed to step away briefly. And then I went back and I was the education director for North Shore Music Theater to go back into the arts for 4 years. And then I had that calling once again to do more human service and help for people. And I started working for the town of Danvers at that point in time as their outreach coordinator for drug-free communities substance abuse grant. And I learned a whole bunch about substance use, but my general approach has always been to you can educate people about any topic is the way I look at it. What I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to get, like I said, I'm trying to get people to pause and to think. And if you can get people to pause and think, you can get them to make healthy decisions. My number one thing too is I'm trying to reduce stigma and I'm trying to provide facts. So as far as the substance use aspect of the education I do, I look at it from a harm reduction standpoint. A harm reduction standpoint. So the first thing I look at is primary prevention is the biggest form of harm reduction. And what I mean by that is if you can get people to never use, great, then you don't have to navigate that issue. So at a young age, we talk about the health impacts of different things. As people age up and as humans, we're generally pretty curious people and we do eventually experiment with things. At that point in time, I like to meet people where they're at and provide them with really factual information about the dangers associated with it so they can make educated decisions and do it as safely as possible if they so choose to. With the overall goal of having people make the safest decision, which is not to use. Basically speaking, though, in addition to that, to complete this question, I ended up doing a tremendous amount of work on substance use, but I also did a tremendous amount of work on communication and compiling community campaigns, finding ways to build motivation around issues in communities and to bring about change, from anything from healthy relationships, recycling programs, substance programs. If it's something that's bringing value to the community, that's what I enjoy doing. So
you work here in the schools?
I do work very closely with the schools. The Youth and Family Service is a department of the town. So we're a town resource, but we have a great relationship with the schools. We partner with the guidance departments, administration to go in and work in the wellness classes to provide education to all of our students. We meet with clients at the schools or in other public buildings for individual care. We do a little bit of everything in town.
Are a lot of young people using marijuana? Or it's-
Right now, we just got the very preliminary data back from the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, which looks at it's a risk assessment of the risk behaviors that our young people are making. We saw a steady decline between 2021, which was the last time we administered the survey, in 2023, which is the data we just got back. That being said, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but I know I want to say it's about 27% of our students, by the time they graduate, will have tried marijuana. That number goes down for regular use. We look at current use as past 30-day use. And those use numbers, I want to say, are in the low 20% right now. And then the frequency of the 20% that are using more regularly varies, but we have all that data as well. Typically speaking, we'll analyze all that data once we get all of it, which will be probably by May, we get the full report. And then in the early fall, when everybody's coming back from summer break, we do community presentations where we really deep dive into that. And we'll talk all about concerns that we have in areas of focus for youth substance use, mental health, other risk behaviors as well. So I highly encourage you to come out to one of those nights and you can learn all about it. We're really transparent with it. We put it on our website. So if you want to dig through the data or you ever want to talk about it, I'm happy to sit down and have a conversation as well.
So is marijuana nowadays considered substance abuse?
So the way we look at it is, even though it's legal, so it's one of those things where for adults, for people that are 21 and over in the state of Massachusetts, it's legal both medically and recreationally. As I'm sure you're aware, it's hard to drive down any street and not find a dispensary at this point in time. Any substance can be abused, or it can be misused, is the way I like to look at it. So whether that's cannabis, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, any other host of substances, coffee, like literally, I mean, caffeine is technically an addictive substance. So we look at it that yes, I mean, you can misuse it, you can misuse sugar, you can misuse anything. We talk a lot about that and about being risk aware and how it impacts you. When we work with young people, we also spend a lot of time talking about brain science and the fact that the human brain doesn't fully develop until the age of 25. And that the introduction of any regularized behavior and or substance use at that point in time is something that is actually rewiring your pathway to dependency and addiction. And that the longer you can wait and the closer you can get to 25 before you start to introduce substance to yourself, the less likely you are to have dependency issues later in life. Questions?
That's a question from online. What behaviors have you seen, kind of touched on this, but what behaviors have you seen increase and what behaviors have you seen decreasing over the years?
Sure. When I first started doing a lot of youth work in this capacity, especially around substance, the number one substance that we were typically talking about at that time was underage drinking. When I first started this work, it was the norm to see the majority of students at least trying alcohol before they graduated, and the majority of students drinking within the last 30 days and also drinking regularly and drinking at dangerous levels. We looked at that as binge drinking, which is typically defined as 5 or more drinks in a period of 2 hours or less, which is a lot. And if you thought about it, though, at the time, it's one of those things where, like, I used to always talk about this with young people. I'm like, generally speaking, when we start experimenting with alcohol, we are not drinking for the finer points of a fine red wine or something like that. If you think back to if you do choose to consume alcohol, if you think back to the first couple of times you probably drank, it was whatever you could get your hands on, and it was how much you could drink in a short period of time that you have where you wouldn't get caught theoretically. We spent a lot of time educating around alcohol and changing policies around alcohol. With that, we've seen a positive impact where now the majority of students, believe it or not, choose not to consume alcohol before they graduate. Less than 50% of our students will have a drink before they graduate. Less than 50%, it's actually down in the 30s, maybe even the high 20s at this point in time, are consuming alcohol on a regular basis. That being said, we see that 28, 30%, something like that, that are consuming alcohol on a regular basis they're consuming a lot of it. And it's one of those things where we're still looking at making sure the education is there and that they're making healthy choices and they understand the impact of that. When we first started, we were also talking a lot about drinking and driving. We've seen a major impact on that, where we see less and less drinking and driving at this point in time. We've done a tremendous amount of education around safe options, having conversations like we were talking about tonight, having those difficult conversations where you have a system set up where if you are in a situation where you feel unsafe, you can call your parents, you can talk to them, they can get a ride. They know what the consequences are or lack thereof if they do that, because we're trying to make sure that people are alive. Having a sober friend that can drive, having the opportunity to have things like Uber and Lyft and things like that. We have all these different options. The things that we are seeing increases on, we saw a lot of increase in mental health reporting. It was around anxiety, isolation, depression, self-harm, suicidality. And I'm not putting any of that lightly. I'm not just rambling through it, but we did see a huge increase in that coming out of COVID, especially. I'm happy to report that in the preliminary report that we got back about the 2023 data, we have seen a steady decline in that as reporting. People are reporting more access to resources once again for a long time. And still, I'm not belittling this whatsoever. There's wait lists for clinical care and therapists. We pride ourselves here in Youth and Family Services that we've always maintained the opportunity to have space for our Wayland residents. And when I say that, anybody who works, lives, and plays in Wayland, we're willing to work with. We're able to expand our demographic to not just youth and families during COVID. We opened it up to the community at large. So if people needed it, we have since brought it back down based on the fact that there are more services available. We have a partnership with HRS, which is Human Relations Services, where we can potentially refer out at that point in time to help place you with mental health care if you're looking for it. And they have people who are dedicated to finding you a space with a different therapist that works for you at that point in time if you're outside of our demographic in family services. But that was a lot of what we saw a lot of increase in, but we're happy that it's coming back down at this point in time. The other main thing that we spent a lot of time working on recently is nicotine addiction and vaping, especially with young people. Once again, we're seeing a decline in that again, but we did a lot of work to help move policy work, increase the age range, like so that 21 is the legal age for vaping at this point in time, reduce the amount of vape products that are available to our young people, and provide more education around the dangers of nicotine addiction. So I hope that answers everybody's question. I know there's a lot. If there's something specific you're looking for, let me know.
So is vaping only legal after the age of 21?
After the age of 21, like, so the same as tobacco purchase at this point in time in the state of Massachusetts, you can legally purchase nicotine delivery devices, be it cigarettes, cigars, vape products, gum, chewable, all those different things over the age of 21 still in Massachusetts. Still don't recommend it. It's never a healthy option, but it is available. But we've got to move up from 18 to 21 at least, and then also reduce the amount of flavors that are available, so hopefully not appealing as much to young people.
Can you say more?
Can you say more about harm reduction? Because I grew up with the DARE program.
Yeah,
and I'm just
I'm
wondering
familiar.
how we swung.
Sure. Whether we're talking about substance, whether we're talking about any other number of risk-based assessment activities, I always like to look at it from a point of harm reduction. Where we're looking at an abstinence-based model, whether we're talking about sexual education, whether we're talking about substance education, whether we're talking about any number of things, it's one of those things where we know the just say no model doesn't really cut it, because similar to everything we talked about tonight, it's one of those things where people want to know why. As human beings, whether we're young, whether we're old, we want to know what it is we're being told to believe in, what it is we're being told to follow. And it's one of those things when we can meet people where they're at, we have the opportunity to have that conversation, to build trust, to build that comfort in dialogue. With harm reduction, I look at it as meeting people where they are. If people are curious about things, they're going to find a way to experience it. They're going to find a way to get the answers that they're seeking. The way I approach it when I'm like, for instance, I was working with with a class of freshmen today, doing training on opioid education and Narcan and the life-saving tactics of Narcan. Because you provide people with the education and the information around things, doesn't mean that they're going to go out and do it. It's actually been scientifically proven at this point in time, and evidence-based models have been worked through on this, that with more information, you can make a more informed decision. If you try to scare people and you lie to them, at that point in time, they're going to figure that out and they're going to be like, that's not true. And then there's the assumption that everything else that you're sharing with them and all of your boundaries and expectations are also potentially not true or flawed. If you can come to them with real evidence-based factual information, tell them about the risks associated with things, talk to them about safety tactics, about if they choose to just do something, whether it is substance related, whether it is about their sexual health, about any of that stuff, their mental health, they have that comfort of talking about it and they know you're not lying to them. So they can make an informed decision. And if they are choosing to do it, they can do it as safely as possible. Thank you.
Any more questions online or in the room?
So which is the greater problem, alcohol or marijuana?
Both.
Not competition.
There's a lot of competition there. I don't like to necessarily put one at like a greater risk than the other. Similar to what we were just talking about with harm reduction, I talk to students very openly about the dangers that they both pose. The difference on, like, I'm not endorsing either one of them, and I talked about this when I talk about any substance, is never am I talking about an endorsement of use. Alcohol, you can go right now, any one of us in this room could go down the street and purchase a bottle of vodka or whatever alcohol you so choose. And if you sat in your car or went home or wherever you chose to be, and you consume that entire bottle in a short period of time, you will die. You can get alcohol poisoning, you can die. With cannabis, you are not going to ingest enough cannabis to die. It doesn't make it better or worse. It's just a fact from a harm reduction standpoint that you're not going to die. Could you make a decision that would lead to death at that point in time through paranoia, psychosis, like any number of questionable choices you're going to make? 100%. If you choose to drive under the influence of cannabis, you could get in a car accident and you could die. Like, there's plenty of things. So we talk about all the risks associated, and we try to provide the most factual information. From a sheer number standpoint, as far as what we're seeing people use more of still, alcohol is still the preferred substance of choice by young people, with cannabis being a close second. So I hope that kind of answered that question.
I just want to say thank you for some of these reminders, especially about defining what you're talking about. And a lot of themes were very familiar, and making time, and we're so intense and overly scheduled. And in my family, I often feel like we're talking across each other, and why didn't you see my Google Calendar entry? So this has been very helpful for me, and I want to say thank you on behalf of everyone here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great night. If anybody needs anything, you know where to find me.
We do.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Youth and Family Services, you can go on the website and all my contact information is there. I believe it was on the flyer for tonight as well. There's some, like, at least an email I think.
I can send it out as well.
If not, I fully endorse that. So yeah, reach out anytime.
Great.